here. Ah, okay, now it's being recorded. There we go. So we have, well, two of our four major endorsers are here tonight, so I'm going to introduce them quickly. We have Tom Axworthy, who served as Principal Secretary and Chief Speechwriter to Canadian Prime Minister Pierre E. Trudeau. He was president and CEO of the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation, which in part is dedicated to Arctic cooperation, Canada's North, and the development of young Northern Canadians. Tom is currently the Secretary General of the Interaction Council, an international organization addressing long-term global issues facing mankind, humankind, of course, so climate change being a major one. He's a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and at Massey College, where I'm also a senior fellow, and the Bill Graham Center of Contemporary International History, Trinity College at the University of Toronto. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Dianne.
Julian Heller is here. He's a three-time candidate for the Ontario New Democratic Party in the Toronto riding of Toronto-St. Paul's, just north of University-Rosedale. He's been riding association president, member of the NDP Provincial Council, and legal counsel to both the provincial party, including as chief electoral officer, and numerous local, provincial, and federal campaigns. In the community, Julian's been chair and member of parent advisory committees of the Toronto District School Board, promoting improvements for public education. He's currently a director of the provincial advocacy group Fix Our Schools, and he's a trial lawyer in downtown Toronto. You can see all those lovely law books behind him. Hugh Segal, who promised to be here and hopefully will be here soon, was chief of staff to Ontario Conservative Premier Bill Davis and later to Canadian Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. He was a candidate for the leadership of Canada's Progressive Conservatives in 1998. He was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2005 and was chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and special envoy to the Commonwealth. He became the principal of Massey College in 2014 and is a distinguished fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Calgary. Also a member of the Trilateral Commission, and hopefully we will see him soon. If not, Julian and Tom, you get longer to talk. Our fourth endorser today is in Italy, and so is asleep by now, but we recorded a video before she went, and that's Barbara Hall. She's a lawyer and community worker. She was a candidate in St. David, which is basically now this riding, for the New Democratic Party. Having served as the Toronto councillor for 3 terms, she became Toronto's 61st mayor in 1994 and presided over a period of great economic growth, including significant improvements to downtown residential neighborhoods like Regent Park and St. Jamestown and Cabbagetown. She was the very first Toronto mayor to march in the Pride Parade, supported local affordable housing, and helped introduce violence against women as a national political issue. She was chief commissioner of the Ontario Rights Commission for 10 years until 2015. So that is our astonishing panel. Oh, and the other person I should introduce who's on screen is Salima Jiwani. Salima is going to host a little later in the evening. She's a wonderful local business owner. And I should say to anybody who's wondering, do you need hearing aids? Go talk to Salima. Turns out that untreated hearing loss is a major predictor of dementia in later life. So don't let it slide. All right, back to this. So the first question, Julian and Tom, is about partisanship in politics. We have such demonization these days of people in other parties, and that makes it really difficult to work together to face huge challenges like climate change. How do you think we can get past this habit of bitter partisan attacks so that we can work across party lines for the common good? Julian, do you want to go first?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of your exciting campaign. In giving some thought to that question, after having been a team member for many decades, I've got the orange apparel to prove it. And yet, I know many successful politicians who have really talked about focusing on the things that people can agree on as opposed to the things that divide them. And that seems elementary, but I think it's worth restating. And a very good and recent example of that came this week. Joe Cressy, a local downtown NDP affiliated councillor in the city of Toronto, resigned from the city council to pursue other activities. And in his letter of resignation, he said he'd like to thank Mayor Tory, and he referred to what he called an unlikely partnership with Mayor Tory. I know that they've been working together very well on COVID and pandemic responses because Joe is head of the Board of Health. And so if a guy like Joe Cressy can reach out to John Tory in his resignation letter, that's a sign that people can work together to get things done. And so I think it's really important to get across the partisan lines to talk about the problems that affect us all as neighbors and colleagues and friends and relatives, and say, hey, how are we going to fix these problems? What makes sense? And I think that's a key to success.
Tom?
Well, I think the first thing that has to occur is that in politics, you have opponents, but you don't have enemies, and that what unites people more, the men and women who put themselves forward for political office, which is a very tough thing to do. I'm full of admiration for anybody who does it for any party, but you do it for a concept of Canada, for a concept of a set of issues that you're in favor of. But that doesn't mean that everybody's wrong. There are a variety of interests. There are a variety of views. No one has the single holy grail of truth about every issue. So intelligent men and women putting themselves forward welcome ideas from other parties and hope that they have good leaders. When I began many years ago as a political assistant to Walter Gordon, who was the Minister of Finance for Mr. Pearson, very junior young speechwriter, he would send me to parliamentary committees not to do opposition research on the Conservatives or the New Democrats, but to see if there were some good ideas that we might incorporate or think about ourselves. That's a mindset that we need now. Our problems are so intense. We need the best from every party. We don't need demonizing of people because they're in a different party.
So, Tom, I think we all agree with you about that. What isn't clear is how do we get back to that? And Hugh, welcome. I'm so glad you made it. We're just discussing this first question about, given the hyper-partisanship that we see increasing in the last few years and the demonization of people from other political views, how can we work together for these overwhelming challenges like climate change? I'll give you one more minute to catch your breath, though. But Tom, I know that there was some more of that in the past. I started in the Ontario government in 1975, but even in committees now, there is so much partisanship. How do you see the way back to working together?
Well, one reason why I'm here this evening, which is you look at the men and women who are putting themselves forward. You look at the quality of candidates. You look to see if they had some breadth of vision, or are they reading notes prepared by some anonymous hack back in a party office? Do we have people who are independent thinkers and who are parties are important? I've been a member of one for most of my life. We need parties to help organize electorates and platforms, but so are individuals. And you look for quality people in every party. And when we have someone like you, who's an exceptional set of assets and qualities to go forward, then that becomes far more important than whatever particular party affiliation one usually supports.
Well,
Start with the candidate.
Thank you, Tom. Hugh, are you ready? Would you like to comment on this? This is the question: how do we get past hyper-partisanship and find ways to work across party lines? And you're on mute, Hugh.
I don't think that history is predictive, but I think history is instructive. I remember when I was growing up, one of the great figures in the Conservative Party was a chap by the name of Dalton Camp. And he was a president of the party, and he had a campaign for the democratization of the party. He'd run for Parliament as a Conservative. But when Prime Minister Mulroney was Prime Minister, he made Mr. Camp a senior policy advisor in the Privy Council office. And one of his focuses was the environmental issue with respect to the old growth in Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia. And Tom McMillan was the Minister of the Environment, and he was from Prince Edward Island. And Dalton was working in the Privy Council office. And Dalton hired a young woman by the name of Elizabeth May, who was a Nova Scotian back then. And they together worked on dealing with that issue and made substantial progress. So party affiliation had nothing to do with getting the job done. People of quality, people with certain skills and backgrounds, people who had a certain sensitivity and capacity to address the issue directly were what was essential. And I think we can see where we are now on climate change, where we are in terms of that ever-growing danger, which is getting closer and closer. The public has a genuine desire to see people work across party lines. Well, that is one good thing, but we need to have the kind of people who will make a difference, who have the mix of skills and experience and background that is beyond party affiliation and absolutely essential to getting the job done. Part of why I'm so delighted to endorse you for the seat you're seeking in the provincial legislature, and why I think it's important that on climate change and other issues, we have the capacity to set party affiliation aside, to work together for good people who will make a real difference.
Well, thank you again for the kind words. One of the things that troubles me, though, is, again, how do we actually make this happen? I know that before I joined the Green Party, I facilitated a meeting between the NDP, the Liberals, and the Greens to see if they could cooperate together to fight some of the destruction of the current government. And there was one joint press conference protesting one of the destructive omnibus bills, and then the party leaders wouldn't allow it anymore. So not Mike Schreiner, of course, but the others. So the question is to how, given that the current political system is such a winner takes all system, it's hard to see party leaders allowing the individual work across party lines that you each have described so eloquently. Am I missing something? Or how do we get party leaders to allow this given the current system?
Well, if I can just jump in on that one, the whole point is the party leaders and the central office, and my two esteemed colleagues on the panel will know more about the inner workings of that than I would as a grassroots riding association level person where I've spent most of my time. But it really comes down to MPs or MPPs having the determination and the will to stand up and speak their minds on matters of conscience or importance. And so, again, quoting some very successful people, Wayne Easter, former MP for Liberal Party, I heard him on the radio a few weeks ago. He said, every voice matters in Parliament. Couldn't agree more. John Turner said to me that he, in the last few years, he said he always considered himself first and foremost a parliamentarian. And so when I ran in Toronto St. Paul's, people, my friends and people I met said, Julian, if you just ran for another party, you would win. And I would say to them, well, if you're prepared to vote for me, it shouldn't matter what party I belong to. And so I encourage you and the others listening to say basically the same thing. You're the person that we're supporting. No party can cover the field perfectly for any individual because there's just too many policies. But if you have a faith in the candidate and the candidate's integrity and belief in certain key issues, then that's the candidate you should support. And we've seen too often MPs and MPPs falling into line, being cowed into submission by the leader's office. And really the answer comes, and Michael Chong federally was instrumental in creating an act which allowed MPs to sort of stand up for themselves more. And so a strong voice such as yours, together with Mike Schreiner, would be an effective counterweight to that party discipline, which is choking discussion in our current political environment.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that you're right, because it does seem to be choking political conversation. And you look at the debriefs of people leaving, particularly Parliament, and most people go in with high hopes, serving the public and making a difference, and they come out feeling beaten up and exhausted and discouraged. So I have to say that's pretty daunting to me, not having tried it yet, but I hope it can be different. So that actually gets to the next question. As you know, I'm running with a small party that until Mike Schreiner got elected, didn't have any seats in Ontario. So to succeed, to be able to make an impact and to stand up for the climate action that we need to, in a first past the post system, and particularly, we need to attract new supporters. So either people who haven't voted before, and in our riding, nearly half the voters didn't vote in the last election, or people who have a traditional party allegiance somewhere else. So how do you think we can, and that's hard for people sometimes to leave, to vote differently than the party that they voted with before. I've had one voter tell me, the very first night he came to Canada, he was alone in a motel and saw an ad for the NDP and has voted for them ever since. How do you think we can make people feel comfortable, safe enough to vote for something different, given the crisis that we're in? Tom, do you want to go first?
Well, I think one of the first points is there a galvanizing issue that is more important than the old partisan attachments? And certainly in terms of the environment, but climate change, but also I want to mention, because I was so admiring of your work as environmental commissioner, the issue of water, safe, clean, potable water here in Ontario and indeed across Canada, threatened on so many fronts, that these are absolutely essential to life itself. And so that one way, which your party stands for and you do personally, is to try to get across the primacy of the issue that means the most to you. And secondly, I know we're talking about the realities of the 21st century now, but when you began, Dianne, by talking about small parties and whether they could have an influence, if we look at history in Canada, there was the Ginger Group with J.S. Wordsworth, 4 or 5 of them only, and they were the people who persuaded Mackenzie King to bring in old age pension in 1927, and many other. I can give many other examples since. So sometimes it's not the number of MPs you have; it's the strength of your idea and your motivation and your ability to persuade, and around the issues of the environment. What so important for the 21st century, perhaps the most important issue for the 21st century, are children and grandchildren. That's the raison d'etre of your party and the raison d'etre of your candidacy. That's a very strong, compelling argument.
Oh, thank you. Hugh?
I would argue that part of what gets anybody elected in a constituency that has been traditionally in the hands of another political party is the nature of the question that candidate asks. Mm-hmm. And I think it's completely legitimate in the well-educated and economically pretty robust constituency in which you're seeking office to ask the following question. Are the risks associated with climate change, are the risks associated with what happens if we do not make progress on that more important than the way you have voted traditionally in the past? Mm-hmm. Is it so important to vote the way you have in the past that doing so without regard to actually getting something done on climate change, reducing our emissions, producing a sustainable long-term future for your children and grandchildren is really not as important as how you voted in the past. I think part of the process is how the question is put. And I think your capacity to do that because of your own skill set, because of the reputation you bring to the battle as a candidate, is actually more important, frankly, than your affiliation with the Green Party. Truth of the matter is, any of the parties in that constituency would have been more than delighted to have you as their candidate. Well, why would that be? Well, that's because of what you bring to the important process of moving our government forward, our province forward on the climate change issue in a timely way so that we do not see what happens if we don't do it properly. So I think you have a certain opportunity to do that. And it takes a capacity to put the question in a pretty direct, blunt, and I would say focused way, so that you don't let the folks who would rather say, well, I've always voted conservative, always voted liberal, hide behind that, because that's not good enough anymore. Whenever we have been through really serious challenges, I think of the world wars and all the rest, we've had unity governments, we've had coalition governments. Why would that be? Because that is the only way to make progress. And the sort of candidacy and I would think contribution you can make is of such a substantial higher nature than that being offered by the other political parties in your constituency. On this issue, you have the capacity to put that question. And the more effectively your campaign does that, the more people who have been comfortable voting the other way without thinking about it are going to think carefully. And in your constituency, when people think carefully, they're going to vote for Dianne Saxe.
Thank you, Hugh. Julian, you have a lot more hands-on experience than I do of how hard it is to get that kind of question to voters at the door, certainly during COVID and winter. So we've been campaigning since last summer, but a lot of it was in the winter. And it's all through COVID. So there's a mask and there's a distance and everything else. And there's very little time that people want to stand at their door in the cold with a stranger and talk about an upcoming election. So can you talk a little bit about this question, Hugh's question, and how to reach out to voters at the door in the short number of seconds that most of them allow?
Well, I mean, again, my colleagues on the panel run and been involved in national provincial campaigns for years. But from my perspective, at the local level, repeat, and then do it again. And then it's funny because as you're at the door, you can feel the effect of the national or provincial wide campaign and the ads, because people at the door start to ask you questions or say things that they've actually heard on the radio or TV, but they think it's their idea, which is understandable. And so the issues that you've got are winning issues, and you're the only person in this riding who can speak with the authority and the experience and the expertise that you have. And that is, you're unchallenged. And so if you've got that trump card, just keep playing it. And then in answer to your other question, but I'm just a small party. There are numerous examples in Canadian history of small parties. And the reality is there are ebbs and flows. The Liberal Party under Kathleen Wynne went from government to losing party status, which is where they are right now. And that's the only reason that the NDP won this riding last time. And so those voters are going to be back in the pool, and you have to give them a nice reason to get out of the pool and join your team. Another example, when I ran in 2003 in Toronto St. Paul's, the NDP had been reduced to below party status in the aftermath of the Bob Rae era. Of course, Jean Charest has come back into the ring, and he was one of two MPs left standing in, I think it was 1993. And so these are ebbs and flows. And so the Reform Party came out of nothing, and you could go on and on. And so Mike Schreiner has been a very effective leader. You're the deputy leader, and Ontario would be fortunate to double that representation and double the voice of the Green Party and the issues that you've been talking about at Queen's Park. And that's the message, that you can make a difference. And whether it's a coalition or whoever forms government, having the two of you there would be twice as effective as having one. And that's a pretty straightforward message to people.
Well, thank you. And I certainly agree with you. And that's part of why I'm running. We've got one last question, this part of the panel, and I'm going to ask each of you just to be brief in 1 minute of talking about younger voters. We know that, I mean, this is University-Rosedale. There's a lot of university students. There's a lot of young people just out of university in the riding, and they have tended not to vote at high levels. And yet it's their future that's being decided on by, everything that we do today. So what's your message to young voters as to why they should bother to vote? What should give them hope? What kind of change can they realistically demand?
I would argue, if I may, Dianne, that in the event people of your capacity and skill are not elected, and we have a parliament made up of people with no particular affinity on this issue, no skill set, no capacity, no one's going to pay a higher price for a longer period of time than those very young people who we need to have show up and vote. And I think you're in a position, and I think your party is in a position to ask the question in your constituency to the many students who live there, do you really think not dealing with climate change or just putting it on a list of other issues, as the other parties tend to do, is going to serve your long-term interest as a citizen, as a potential parent, as a participant in our economy, in our culture, in our society? Or do you think it's time to actually make a difference and vote for someone who can be part of that solution? I think the question has to be put, if I may say so, quite bluntly. And the more bluntly that question is put, the more I think bright young people, and I recall my time at Massey College working with them, they will be not in any way constrained by the old political parties or their biases. They'll be looking for a new solution. And in this context, in this riding, in this election, the definition of new solution is Dianne Saxe. And I think you have to be straightforward and focused about that, as should your campaign.
All right, well, we'll do our best. Julian.
Well, young voters are definitely a key to your success. I say to young voters, if you don't vote, you're leaving the decision to old people who do go and vote, because they know that if they vote, they preserve the situation that's been very good for them. And statistics show that wealthy people vote for the same reason. They like to preserve the status quo because it's been very good for them. So if people don't like the status quo, the only way, not the only way, but a major way that they can change that is by taking the simple step of going out to vote. And so again, to use a quote from someone much more well-known than I, Wayne Gretzky says, you don't score on 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you don't vote, you got no one to blame but yourself. And actually voting is pretty simple. There are advanced polls, and you don't have to register like in the United States, and you just need to have proof of your residence and show up. And so circle the date. And, it would be great if you could vote online, because that would solve a lot of problems. But the reality is there are polling places within walking distance of wherever they live, and it's a 5-minute exercise. Having said that, you have to break through the cynicism and the distrust. I remember one time I was on election day polling the vote, an apartment building, the polling place was literally across the street. And I said to a young woman, have you voted? It's right across the street. And she then gave me actually a very cogent explanation as to why she was not going to participate in a system that she didn't believe in. And so you have to break that. But for a candidate such as yourself on an issue that's so important, I think that young people should take the matter into their own hands and start to make changes so that we live in a better Ontario.
I do have to remember that quote from Gretzky. Good point. Tom.
There's another quote from Wayne Gretzky. Now that Julian has mentioned the hockey reference, he always said, you don't skate where the puck is, you skate to where it's going to be. And in terms of climate change, it's going to be with people like yourself who actually have solutions and have the intellectual capacity and the leadership to make a real difference. And I think young people will respond to that.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, I think that with young people in particular, but perhaps voters in general, one of the key things would be to see if you could get some buzz going in your campaign. Is it fun? Is it optimistic? Is it positive? Are you making things happen? So I think a two-step strategy for helping make that happen. And you may be doing this already. But the first is to participate in as many candidate debates as you can. And if your opponents will not debate, challenge them. Say, I'd like to meet you, and we're going to talk about this. And do this in different parts of the riding so that people understand that you're forthright, you're willing to debate, and this then gives you a chance for your compelling story. And the second element with young people and anyone else, it's an old campaign technique, but the key I often find is, can you persuade others who can have a ripple effect? That is the old idea of block parties. If you have some young supporters, can they have a pizza party with 20 or 30 of their young people to talk about? Can you have block parties to try to make your arguments that we've been talking about, the impact of smaller parties or how individuals can change? So one way to make yourself different from the direct mails and the social media, as important as those techniques are, be the candidate who will debate anybody, anytime, anywhere, and be the candidate that will meet in person with young people and anyone else who wants to invite 20 of their friends.
Well, COVID makes that harder to do in person, but it's really good advice. And thank you very much, Tom. Well, wonderful to hear all three of you and your optimism and your support. I am very grateful. I'm very grateful for your support, and I'm grateful for your words. So I'm going to turn this back to Brian to introduce Salima.
Thank you, Dianne, and thank you all of the panelists, and that was very inspiring for me to listen to as well. So I would like to introduce Dr. Salima Jawani. Salima is the director, owner, and lead audiologist at Audio Sense Hearing and Balance, an audiology clinic in Yorkville in Toronto, which is part of the University-Rosedale riding. She earned her PhD in auditory neurophysiology and neurosciences at the University of Toronto. And I believe from actually looking you up today that your research specialty was in cochlear implants and experiences of people who've grown up with them, which I found interesting because a cousin of mine has had that. So maybe that's something we talk about another time. Dr. Salima Jawani was one of Dianne's early endorsers. We're really thrilled to have a successful local business person here to lead the endorsement section of our event. And so I'd like to turn it over to Salima to speak to her own reasons for supporting Dianne, and then she will facilitate this next section of our event.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. So I'm here today because I've known Dianne for almost 5 years, and I continue to be impressed by her work on environmental issues and the protection of the climate and energy. But I'm actually more impressed with who she is as a person, as a woman, as a leader. And I think she's the right person to drive home some change and to make people, but also other political leaders, feel safe enough to have discussions around protecting the environment and share in her vision for a clean, sustainable, and energy efficient economy. And it's because of who she is as a person. She just has the right personality. She has the right energy. And so I'm a mom and a business owner. So I'm always thinking about the future. And I want my children to grow up in a green, clean world. And Dianne, in my esteem, is the right person and the best person to get us there, as least as leader of the Green Party for University-Rosedale. And luckily, I'm not the only one. So we actually have a few wonderful individuals here who are going to share their own reasons for supporting Dianne. With that, we're actually going to start with a video from Barbara Hall, Brian, if you want to go ahead and play that video for us.
Hi, my name's Barbara Hall. I spent a dozen years as a municipal politician and then mayor of Toronto. And I'm proud to be endorsing Dianne Saxe for MPP in University-Rosedale in the upcoming provincial election. There are a lot of really hot issues, but climate needs to stay at the top of the pile. She's very knowledgeable about the environment. Dianne is smart. She doesn't shy away from issues. She's a clear, intelligent voice. She knows very well how to speak truth to power. You know, I think about my kids and my grandkids, and I'm worried what is going to be there for them. Dianne's voice is something that will force this issue to be dealt with, and we'll all be better off for that. My name is Barbara Hall, and I'm proud to be endorsing Dianne Saxe for MPP in University-Rosedale in the upcoming provincial election.
Wow, that was beautiful, and I couldn't agree more with Barbara. Dianne is knowledgeable, she instills trust, and she practices what she preaches, and I think that's evident when you see her riding her bicycle in the middle of winter. Dianne already gave a beautiful introduction to some of her other endorsers that are here on the panel today, but I'd like to invite Tom to share with us why it is that he is supporting Dianne. And Tom, you know, what do you think we need to do to get more people to follow your lead and support Dianne?
Well, I guess one of the points that so impressed me about Dianne is that I'm a university lecturer, and her reports as an environmental commissioner were so expert, so well written, so much on the point that I used to use them in my classes as source material, which is rare for taking government documents. I mean, it was not only that the fact base was there, but they were well thought out and so well articulated. And so to have somebody who was such a superior public servant in trying to educate Ontarians about the tremendous issues going forward, when she made that leap to say that I'm not only going to write about it, but I'm going to try to change laws and persuade people and live the very hard life it is to be a politician today, that's when I know personally, when I talk about her being a superior candidate, it's not just her character and her background. I've seen her work as a public educator, as environmental commissioner. If she can carry that into the legislature, we'll have a tremendously strong advocate for a better future for Ontario and Canada.
Thank you, Tom. Julian, I would now like to ask you, why Dianne? Why are you here today, and why have you agreed to endorse Dianne?
Thank you. Well, it's a great honor to be able to speak in support of Dianne and her candidacy for MPP. We've talked about her experience, her expertise, and I'm not going to go over all of that. That is, you know, unchallenged in this group. So I'm going to turn a little bit more to some of the things that some of the others have said and pick up some themes from that. As a longtime NDPer, you know, we talk about social justice, but the reality is that climate justice is social justice. And if you can't achieve climate justice, there are going to be around the world billions of people forced to migrate to escape floods, not to mention other cataclysmic weather events. And so if we talk about building sustainable cities, having affordable housing, protecting our forests, there is no person better situated to make the arguments, not out of some ideological belief, but based on facts and evidence. And so I think Hugh mentioned Clayoquot Sound. There was a time when NDPers leading the charge to preserve that jewel, which is now a national, it might even be a UNESCO heritage site. And yet, again, speaking personally, in the last federal campaign, a group of young activists confronted the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, and asked if he was prepared to agree to a moratorium on old growth logging in Fairy Creek. And he wouldn't answer the question. And if an NDP leader can't answer a question about a moratorium, it doesn't require a final decision. There are people chaining themselves to trees to stop 1,000-year-old trees from being cut, and the leader of the NDP is not prepared to do that. So that speaks volumes. And it means we've got to do something different. And then in a much more sort of microscopic level, but it's symbolic, Doug Ford is going to return whatever $120 or $200 a year for vehicle registration fees or license plate renewal fees or whatever it is. And as I understand it, Mike Schreiner was the only person to stand up in the legislature to vote against that. Well, so who can you trust to stand up for things that are important? An NDP or a Liberal MPP who's going to do whatever the leader's office says, or Dianne Saxe? That's a rhetorical question. We know the answer to that. And finally, I would say and this is perhaps more Hugh's domain, but to all you non-Doug Ford Tory voters in this riding who don't think that returning the money and think that the environment needs to be supported, if you think that you're more of a John Tory conservative who can work with somebody like a Joe Cressy, well then Dianne Saxe is somebody who I think is going to prove that she's able to work across party lines. And for all of those reasons, I can't think of a more delightful honor than to endorse Dianne this evening.
Thank you, Julian. I couldn't agree more. Hugh, if I could call on you to tell us, why are you supporting Dianne? And in your opinion, what do we need to do to get people to follow your lead to support Dianne?
Salima, I have only one word that sums up in total why I'm supporting Dianne and think it's really important that she be elected to the legislature. And that word is courage. You know, what we have seen around the climate change issue, however it's been discussed and however there have been sort of trends in favor of embracing the issue more directly from time to time, the bottom line is that the vast majority of players in the political process are always glad to sideline it because for them there's some other issue which is more important on a temporary basis. I saw the reports she wrote when she was commissioner. They were science-based, evidence-based, and if that report produced a result that was critical of the government of the day, she didn't care. She let the science and the evidence of that report be in the public domain, which is probably why the Ford administration was quick to let her go, frankly. Any administration that thinks in our present circumstance, building more highways, reducing the cost of gas, reducing the tax on energy is a way to make progress on climate change is completely disconnected from any semblance of reality. So I asked myself, who is going to have the courage in the Parliament of Ontario to stand up every day and confront the government of the day, if it's not a Green government, which it's unlikely to be, with the realities that have to be addressed? And I come up with one person, and that is Dianne Saxe. And remember this, governments get elected in majorities, and then they have an election a little bit later, and they don't come back with majorities, they come back with minorities. And then every single vote in the legislature is essential for the way that parliament works. And I think there's a very real chance that this coming election will not see any party get a majority. It'll be a minority parliament. And then the individual voices of every MPP will matter. And we need Dianne Saxe's voice because of her courage, because we're not going to get over the hump of people avoiding the issue of climate change unless someone with integrity, background, evidence-based, and a scientific ability and courage confronts the system. And that is what Dianne is in a unique position to do.
Thank you, Hugh. We do have another endorsement from a very well-known personality in our community. Brian, if you can go ahead and play the video for us.
Hi, I'm R.H. Thompson. Endorse Dianne Saxe. How could I not endorse Dianne Saxe? She's amazing. She's smart, she's informed, she's experienced, she knows a climate file, she knows government, she knows public policy. Why would we not want her sitting in the legislature for the Green Party? Go for it.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a wonderful little video too. Thank you, Salima, for hosting that section, as well as for all of your kind words. Julian, Tom, Hugh, those were lovely sentiments and very strong endorsements that I know Dianne truly appreciates. We have a few moments for some question and answer for the panelists. And I don't think I will direct the question to specific panelists. I'll ask you to jump in, whoever feels like they'd like to answer these questions. And I've collected some from the Q&A, and I've tried to write some down from the chat as well. One of the earlier questions that we got, and this is from Tony Key, is that several commentators have suggested that the only way to tackle climate issues and perhaps others is to establish a war cabinet similar to the one in Canada and the UK during World War II. And actually, at some point after Tony asked that question, I think Hugh Segal had mentioned unity and coalition governments that we had during the world wars and other periods of crisis. Tony's question comments that this might be impossible in our current polarized political environment. So for the panelists or whoever would like to answer, I guess, A, is this a good idea? Is this something we should be pursuing? And B, is it realistic to get that kind of unity government to focus on this defining challenge?
Well, Brian, if the question is, do we think it's possible that the nature of the climate challenge and the looming disaster is such that political parties would have to work together as one would in the case of an emergency? I think it's completely rational to suggest that that's true, and that is real. And it's a genuine proposition that may emerge if governments do not do what they need to do collectively and responsibly on climate change. Then the question is, if that happens, who do you want to be part of that larger grouping who happens to be a member of the Green Party whose commitment on the issue of the environment is unassailable? And the answer is, if you can have someone like Dianne Saxe in that mix, then the quality of those discussions will be better. The acuity of the decisions made will be more relevant to the decisions that have to be taken and the solutions that have to be implemented. So I don't, we can't know exactly how that would come together, but in the past, there was no pattern by how it came together in terms of how it came together. But when there were circumstances that were so dire, politicians of different parties realized that that was the only way to proceed. And I think we have to assume that there is a genuine chance of that happening. And who would you want to have in the mix in that context? And that produces the answer of Dianne Saxe.
And if I could just add to that from a slightly different angle, political parties and political leaders respond to the signals which voters send them. So imagine the seismic shock that would go through the established party leaders' offices if the voters of University-Rosedale, in the center of North America's fourth largest city, elect the second MPP to go to Queen's Park. If that's not a statement about what's important to people, I don't know what is. And I think the influence flows from there. None of us can predict what the numbers are going to be, or what the coalitions or endorsements or, working arrangements or supply agreements or whatever words you want to put. The one thing that a voter in University-Rosedale can control is who they vote for. And if enough people decide that the climate emergency is important enough and that Dianne Saxe is the person to lead that and speak to truth to power, then if we elect Dianne Saxe as a Green Party member, that will cause behavioral and legislative change on its own.
Thank you. I realized I also wanted to, and thank you both. I realized I also wanted to thank again the other endorsers that we have in the audience, and please feel free to say hi in the chat to identify yourself, but we really do appreciate it. It is 8 o'clock, but I'm going to ask one more question just because we did start late. And maybe Tom, since he didn't speak on the last one, would like to, of course, feel free to pass if you wouldn't. But there was an interesting question in the chat that has been on my mind too, which is how do we get people, and I think the question referred to voters, to prioritize longer term challenges such as climate change, as opposed to the focus we often see on short term issues and concerns?
Well, that's been a question of political science and political operators ever since Athens invented democracy. The only simple answer is really political education and trying to take, and this is one reason that Dianne is so valuable and her reports as commissioner were so valuable, to take these large ideas, climate change and the large macro issues that are hard to understand, and to make it clear what are the sinews of connection, and then how does it affect the individuals? What does it mean for you in terms of the possibility of floods going up and your basement getting flooded because of water issues, asthma going up because of pollution in the air, forest fires burning because of climate change and what that will mean. And so the way to get voters to focus on the long term is for them to understand what will happen to them in the short term if there isn't the kind of long scale perspective that you need. And that's what Dianne has done all her life, understanding the abstract and understanding the science, but bringing it down so that any voter can understand how it affects him or her personally. That's the way you get long-term understanding, is to have voters understand how the impacts will be on them and their children.
Thank you. I don't know if either Hugh or Julian would like to weigh in on that question. How do we get voters to focus on long term?
Well, I'm not going to add much to what Tom said, but I would say this. When you do detailed research on voter opinions, they will have strong views on issues. They will have strong views on what's important to them. But the only way those views matter on election day is if they are in fact salient. In other words, they actually become a determinant of their vote itself. And I would argue that one of the core questions that has to be addressed in this campaign is, of all the issues being talked about, what is likely to be most salient in your life, in your children's life, in your grandchildren's life, sooner than we care to admit? And I think there'd be a huge consensus that that is actually climate change. And if that's the consensus, the challenge is to translate that consensus into the one thing they can do on election day or in the advance polls to really make a difference on that front. And that one thing is to vote for Dianne Saxe. There's nothing else they can do in that constituency between now and election day that would make a difference to the extent that voting for Dianne Saxe would. So if you boil down the question to the one thing that is actually doable, you come up with the answer that we're all here tonight to endorse and advance.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Hugh and Tom and Julian, Salima and Brian. Thank you for helping make this a wonderful evening. I've cried a couple of times. I appreciate everybody's good wishes. I have to say that wishes won't, wishes aren't horses. Anybody who likes what I stand for, likes what we stand for, you got to help make it happen. I've been talking to voters now for more than a year. I've taken more than a year off my law practice. We're working as hard as we can work. We've been reaching out to voters, knocking on doors, standing on street corners, phoning every week since more than a year ago. But there's still, most of the people in the riding don't even know there's an election. And most of the people in the riding think that they have to stop Ford, and that in order to stop Ford, they have to vote for either the NDP or the Liberals, completely ignoring the fact that nothing anybody can do in these downtown ridings has any say on how many seats Ford gets. University-Rosedale hasn't voted Conservative in 40 years. And so to get past that mistaken assumption and people's ignorance that we're even having an election with the war in Ukraine and COVID exploding, inflation, all the other things that people have to worry about. The only way we can do that is by actually reaching out and talking to voters. There's 88,000 voters in this riding. No matter how hard I work, I can't talk to them all. I need your help. So please, if you want to see the kind of change that everyone's talking about tonight, it's only going to happen if you step forward. There's only 8 weeks left. Have a neighborhood party, fantastic. Put up a sign, dead easy. It'll be brought to your house around the 4th of May. Get onto the phone team so we can phone all those people in those high rises that we haven't been allowed to go into yet. Please, please, please come join us, help us. Let's make this real. We're doing everything we can. Now it depends on you. Website is votefordianne.ca. All the information is there. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Dianne. Thank you for running, and thank you for your work tonight. Thank you, Salima. Thank you, Julian, Tom, and Hugh. This will conclude the formal portion of the evening. I would like to invite anybody here from the press or from the media to stay online, and if we will have media availability at this time, and so if you would like to either raise your hand or just indicate in the chat, we will make sure that you can speak. For everybody who's attended tonight, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your ongoing support and interest. And we do hope, as Dianne said, that you will consider volunteering, consider getting a sign. Certainly check out the website at Vote for Dianne, and you can see the spelling of Dianne's name on her screen. Vote for Dianne. Oh, now am I going to mess this up? Is it .com or .ca?
It's .ca, and it works no matter
.ca.
how it doesn't matter how you spell my name, it'll still work.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for the evening. Good luck, Dianne. Cheerio.
Good luck, Dianne. All the very best.
Good luck, Dianne. Vote for Dianne. Bye.
Okay, that was very good. Thanks for all the attendees who are still online with us, and for the panelists. That was a great evening. So appreciate that. I don't think we have any further follow-up questions or press activity at this point. But I have a feeling that this recording and whatnot is going to generate some of that. So we'll look forward to